Hello and welcome to the Coralosophy Podcast. This is episode 56, Audio Engineering for Dummies, with Josh Williams. Now, of course, I don't want to call any of you dummies. I just think that's a funny title. I know that right now, because of COVID and because of the brave new world that we're in, a lot of us have had to take crash courses in recording our choirs or in audio manipulation of some kind or electronic solutions to some of our problems getting our performances out to people. And that's not what we're trained to do. So many of us are probably making things up as we go along. I know I am. And so I thought I would invite Josh to talk to us about some of the basic things that if you're not trained in audio engineering, that you would probably want to have in your bag of tricks if you need to create something decent and something you can be proud of to send home to mom and dad or to patrons of your community choir or performances when you can't have a live audience and you need to come up with some kind of an electronic solution. So Josh is going to walk us through that, and I'll tell you a little bit about Josh. Josh is the art director for Hallmark Corporation, which essentially means he is the lead audio engineer. All of the sounds that you hear coming out of the cards and the toys are creations of Josh's audio lab there at Hallmark Corporation. And of course, Hallmark is in Kansas City, so he's a local. So he came over to my house, and so you'll hear a change in the audio quality as I move over to Josh, we switch our setup a little bit to my two-person setup. So apologies for that inconsistency. I'm still trying to figure out all of my own audio engineering solutions to my problems. So this was not only for your benefit, but my benefit. So I'm excited to talk to Josh a little bit, and I'll get you there as soon as we can. Some fun facts about Josh. The connection here is that he and I went to high school together. So this was a natural progression. He sang in choir with me in high school. He since is married to Courtney, who is the feeder middle school teacher to my program. So she teaches my future students and does a great job of preparing them for high school choir. So this is a great little connection, and it's so nice to have access to an expert like Josh. Josh has a lot of experience recording choirs, so he's not just, of course, putting noises in teddy bears. He has a lot of musical experience, and so I thought he'd be a perfect person to talk to. And it's also just a series of connections that led to this episode, and I thought, what a perfect way for you to have a little walkthrough, step by step, of the things to know, the things to consider when you are setting up your own little makeshift recording studio for your choirs. And if you've never even thought about doing this, you might get enough information here to become empowered to create recordings of your own choirs, and that would be wonderful. Before we get there, though, to Josh, just have a few reminders. This show is completely listener supported. Yes, we've got some sponsors on the banner, but what that means is that you support me by choosing to support those vendors. And they are awesome vendors. They are really, truly providing excellent products for choral professionals, and they're great people too. So you don't need an excuse to support those companies. And when you do that, you're also supporting the show. That means going to My Music Folders, Sight Reading Factory, mychoirrobes.com, Voce Vista. And then when you need sheet music, you're heading to ryanmain.com and graphitepublishing.com. And every time you make a purchase there, you enter that Coralosophy checkout code, you get a coupon discount, and I am then supported as well. That's how that works. And then, of course, the people who choose to head over to patreon.com/Coralosophy and just basically buy me a coffee every month for $3 a month. And, of course, there's also more stuff there. I load all kinds of materials there, including, at the very least, a once a month private podcast and a private podcast feed that gets pushed right to your podcast player. So it's a pretty cool deal. And these are the ways that I keep this show solvent and keep the show working, is having listeners who are dedicated and listeners who are willing to go the extra mile to help, whether it be financially in those ways that I just described, or even just sharing, liking, commenting, interacting with the show. Anything like that helps me get the word out and makes doing this show possible. So I'm excited for you to get this information here from Josh. So with no further ado, here's Josh Williams. Well, I'm here with Josh Williams. Josh and I just got done eating some awesome tacos with some awesome steak that I grilled because I'm an amazing griller. And let's just be honest, it was pretty juicy. But Josh yes, we're gonna talk about the sound engineering basics. So Josh, first tell us about you and why should we listen to you when you talk about sound engineering?
My name is Josh Williams, and I am the art director for the sound studio at Hallmark Cards. And before that, I spent about 12 years in the studio world, doing recording and producing for all kinds of different groups, from rock bands and hip hop artists to classical music groups, orchestras, choirs, a lot of jazz. So got quite a wide background in the audio world.
Is that something you studied in college?
It is, yeah. I got my degree in music technology and studied audio engineering, and also performed in lots of music groups at school as part of the degree program, for choir and band and orchestra. You can't record music if you don't know music, so... Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is definitely an advantage. I know Josh, you've audio engineered several choral albums that I've been involved with, like Contrai albums, and Josh's wife Courtney sings in our group, and so we've had lots of chances to collaborate. So I'm excited to have this conversation, and what I've been explaining to Josh, for those of you who are listening, is that what I really want to do in this brief conversation is talk about this new world that choir directors are in now, where we all of a sudden, many of us, are being thrust into a world where we have to try to figure out electronic solutions for getting our choir's work to the audience, whether it be an online audience or parents wanting to listen to a recording later. Less live audiences means more electronic audiences. And so many of us have no training, we have no background, we have never pressed record on anything with our choirs, because we're very live. It's a live-based art form. Yes, you record choirs if you're a professional choir or whatever, but for the most part, choirs don't record themselves as their way of getting their music out to people. So we want to talk about, I guess we'll call this choral or choir recording for dummies today, and we'll talk a little bit about that.
No one here's a dummy, though.
Right.
No listener's a dummy.
Yeah, no one's listening as a dummy, but we'll pretend like we're dummies for this conversation. So I'm going to start out with a few just very basic questions. If I'm a teacher trying to set up, let's say my goal is just, I can't have a live audience, but I want to create as good of a sound as I can, knowing that I'm not going to invest a bunch of time to become trained as an audio engineer like you are, but I also can't spend thousands of dollars hiring somebody / buying fancy equipment, all that kind of stuff. So I just want to get a decent, respectable thing to send home to mom and dad. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that people might come across if they look up, if they go on Google and they're saying, okay, how do I record my choir? They're going to probably see things like USB mics. They're going to see XLR mics. What's the difference, and why do we care, and are there pros and cons?
Yeah, there's definitely pros and cons to both. So a USB mic is going to be the simplest and cheapest solution, where it is a microphone that will plug into directly to the computer without having to have what we call an audio interface in between. It's basically plug and play. You can set the mic in front of your ensemble and then plug it into your computer, pull it up in whatever software is on your computer, whether it's GarageBand if you're on a Mac, or some people might use Audacity on a PC. There's other more expensive software out there, Pro Tools, Studio One, things like that. So that is going to be your simplest solution, though, in terms of just getting a sound. Mm-hmm. The advantage of an XLR is you're going to have more control over the placement. You're going to have more control over the overall tone of the sound, going into an audio interface and having more fine-tuned adjustments for the leveling, that sort of thing. You're still going to be going into some sort of software program like GarageBand or Pro Tools. It's just a matter of what is the sort of end goal for your recording. Are you doing this for evaluations within your classroom? Is this going to be something that you just want to send home to parents? Is this something that you want to be able to be proud of and publish to YouTube? You definitely get what you pay for, mm-hmm. with audio gear, up to a certain threshold. But, if you're talking about a $50 USB mic, the issues you're going to have is noise and tone quality. It may sound thin and brittle. It may distort easily. You have less control over the level. And so with a choir, you have a very wide dynamic range. Mm-hmm. So you need to be able to pick up the subtlest of pianissimo sounds, and then the loudest of fortes without distortion and without noise. Mm-hmm. Because with the cheaper mics, that's the biggest problem you have is noise floor. So if you're recording a soft ensemble in a quiet room, you're going to hear lots of hiss on a cheap microphone. Mm-hmm. As you spend more money, they put better electronics into the microphone and you get a cleaner sound. And then they can also handle a wider dynamic range. They'll be able to handle the really loud sounds without distortion. Mm-hmm.
Now, go back, because I'm kind of, I'll put myself somewhere in between dummy and expert. But one of the things you said already kind of lost me, and I just want to make sure I'm understanding it. So you talked about with an advantage with XLR microphones going into an audio interface, even if it's a simple one, I'm assuming, is mic placement. Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, and then balancing the different mics. So does that mean that one of the things that might be advantageous is that a mic could be placed up close to singers, but then there might be a mic further away from singers, and those mics could each be set to different levels of sensitivity? Is that the benefit?
Yes, you have much finer control over the sensitivity, but also just placement in terms of like how far is your cord going to reach. Most USB mics max going to have a 6 or 9 foot cable. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the height of your mic stand, you can only go up so high before your computer's dangling from a mic stand, which you don't want to do.
Right.
Whereas with an XLR cable, you can run 100-foot cables without any change in sound. You're not going to have any noise issues, things like that. So you can have your computer sitting up next to your conductor stand to be able to control start and stops and things like that, and run 50 or 100-foot XLRs out to your microphones and have those placed wherever in your room that you need them to be to get the best sound.
Okay, so do you? It's with you, and I could just be again misunderstanding this. So if I take a USB and try to, because I at school have some of those USB extenders. Mm-hmm. Am I losing sound quality by extending the USB?
You're not losing sound quality, but at some point it's going to be so long that it won't work.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Huh.
So, you could probably put on like one 10-foot extender, but if you try to string too many together, it may not be able to send and receive the data.
Interesting.
Yeah.
But that's just a non-issue with XLR.
Correct.
Okay. And of course...
And technically with XLR, you could literally run up to 500 feet without any sort of signal loss.
Okay. So it just gives you a little bit of flexibility, especially I'm thinking about like in our COVID scenario where choirs that even if they are in person and they're trying to record something, and maybe the audience isn't there, but we're trying to record something so mom and dad can hear and all those kinds of things. The choir is more distanced anyway than normal. Mm-hmm. And so it sounds like if the XLR would give quite a bit of advantage there because you could set more mics around the room to pick up singers. Because I'm thinking in my own context, if I try to get a choir of 60-something socially distant singers recorded with one USB mic, there's almost nowhere in a room I could put that one mic to pick everybody up equally and get like a balanced sound.
Yeah, that definitely becomes more difficult. So in terms of just like placement of your microphone, a good starting point is to take the distance from the left to the right of your ensemble and then create an equilateral triangle with your microphone. So if your ensemble is 30 feet across, then you're going to take, and roughly estimate 30 feet from the ends of your ensemble to create that triangle. And that is a really good starting point for your mic placement.
Okay.
that's going to give you sort of the most generic stereo image of your ensemble. And then depending on the room you're in, is the room you're in dry? Is it reverberant? Are you in a gymnasium, or are you in a performing arts theater? All those factors are going to then determine, do you need to move that mic closer to your ensemble, or do you need to move it further back? As you move closer, you're going to get a wider stereo image, which means you're going to hear more of a spread across your ensemble. But you're also going to start to hear more detail in the voices. So better enunciation, things like that. But the risk is then you start to also hear individual voices sticking out of the ensemble. The further back you go, the more room becomes a factor in terms of reverberation and blend of the voices, things like that. So from that triangle that you've just started with, if you move forward, you can get more detail. If you move back, you're going to get less detail, more room, more reverb. Your stereo image shrinks a little bit, but you get better blend. And so a lot of that depends on, the room that you're in and the size of your ensemble in terms of, if you're dealing with a 60 or 70 person concert choir or a 24 person chamber choir, that can really change the distance of your microphone.
Right. Okay. So let's stay on that topic a little bit more. So the placement of the microphone, especially if you're talking about microphones singular, right? That kind of the description you just gave kind of describes that. Like you're moving the one mic back forward or the one mic back. What about when you do have that audio interface option, and you've got, say, two microphones? You've got, or let's just go with two, because we're going to try to keep that simple. So what if you have the setup that you can do two microphones? How do you change that math?
So I would still use the two microphones on the same stand. So you do what's called a stereo miking configuration. The most standard setup is what we call the XY configuration, which is two microphones that have their capsules aligned in a 90-degree pattern. And this is going to give you just the most basic stereo miking setup. So you're hearing a left and right spread of your ensemble, which is very different than just taking like a single USB mic, which is going to be mono. So at that point, you're not getting any sort of stereo sound. It's just the choir, no matter how wide they're spread, is all hitting that microphone and being blended into a singular channel. There are, so if you look at, there's lots of like portable microphones out there by like Zoom and Tascam and things like that, where you'll see two little microphone capsules that are positioned at the front of the recorder. And that's what I'm talking about in terms of an XY pattern, where you've got the two capsules that are at a 90 degree angle, which is going to give you the cleanest stereo image. Okay, so that's even better than, so that'd be more effective to use the two mics in that XY pattern than, say, putting one off to one side of the ensemble, the other off to the other side of the ensemble, or one close to the ensemble and one far away. That is going to be, So what you're talking about, where you have, say, one microphone on the left side and one microphone on the right side, that's what we call an AB stereo pattern. That will give you a nice wide stereo image, but you also then have problems with what we call phasing, where, let's say, the singers from the left side of your ensemble are hitting the left microphone sooner than they are hitting the right microphone. So the time it takes for their sound to travel and hit the left mic versus the time it takes to hit the right mic can then cause some sound issues where you can get phasing, things will start to sound a little fuzzy. It can sort of, a lot of times with like consonants, like with choir and things like that, they become less clear because you have that time delay between, because the same thing's happening on the right side where the singers on the right are hitting the right microphone first, and then by the time it reaches the left microphone, they're just slightly out of sync. So that's why with most choir things that I record, my main setup is going to be some sort of stereo pattern in the middle, like an XY.
Okay, that makes sense. And if you're doing that XY, you've got two microphones. You're going into some kind of an audio interface, which is then going into your computer, right? So, are there audio interfaces out there that are so simple to use that a beginner, a total noob, could figure it out?
Sure, there are. You can get what you're going to want to do is first look for an audio interface that has two XLR microphone inputs. There's a lot of interfaces out there that will say, "Hi, I'm 2 channels," but it's really one microphone and one instrument channel, which is a whole different connection. So you want to make sure it has 2 XLR inputs. But there's several out there from different companies like Focusrite, PreSonus, Zoom, Behringer, and honestly, most of them are starting in the $150 to $200 range.
Okay.
Up to maybe $300 for a 2 microphone input. And most of those are pretty simple in terms of plug and play, where they might have an audio driver that you have to install, but it's literally plug it in with USB and pull up your software, whether it's GarageBand or something else, and it should be ready to go.
Okay, right. So if you've got kind of that basic setup, you're basically looking at. It sounds like from your assessment so far, you've got the USB option, which is the simplest option for somebody who really just is overwhelmed by the idea of lots of pieces, lots of cords, lots of stuff to deal with. Your USB option is probably your go-to if the rest of that overwhelms you. But for not much more money beyond that, I know I've spent $125, $150 on a really good USB mic, because those of course have a range as well. But then for $150, $200, you're into the audio interface. So if you're wanting to spend a little bit more money, it sounds like even at the entry level, I guess is what I'm getting at, the XLR option is going to be more expensive than the USB option.
Yeah, there's just more components.
Right.
You've got your microphones, your cables, your interface. All of that's going to add up. You might be looking at, for a pair of decent microphones, you could get them for $150, $200, another $150, $200 for an interface. By the time you get cables, maybe some software, you're looking at probably a $500 investment.
Right.
As your baseline.
Right. So if you're a school that's got a budget that you can absorb that kind of thing, that might be worth it for you, because then you're thinking about, well, if I'm using it now during COVID because I've never used it before, now I have to make all these recording projects. At least I have it on hand and I can use it someday in the future when I'm, recording an audition for a convention or something like that. But it kind of goes back to what you said at the very beginning, which I think is really important. It depends on what your goal is for the recording. If this is truly supposed to be very simple for an audience that doesn't really care, they're going to love it if there are kids in it.
Yep.
Then maybe the USB option is great. And then if it's a little bit, you're trying to go for that slightly higher production value, the XLR audio interface might be good. So let's move now to talking about the softwares that do the editing. Okay, so let's say you've got, regardless of which way you went USB or you went XLR, and you've got a raw file, and you're getting ready to do the editing. I'm a Mac person, and so I'm familiar with GarageBand. First let's do it this way. Let's talk about GarageBand and then other equivalents for other non-Mac users.
Yeah, so GarageBand is great because it just comes with every Mac. It is not necessarily designed for this type of recording. It's more designed for people who want to take loops of sound and create a song, using some hip hop beats and guitar loops and things like that. But It does have enough editing capabilities and effects to be able to do a decent choir recording. There isn't really an equivalent on the PC side in terms of something that just comes with a computer, but there is a free program out there that is PC only called Audacity, which I'm sure most PC users would be familiar with. And it is great if all you need to do is take a file from, say, maybe you have a portable recorder, or if you just literally need to plug in some microphones, record it, trim the audio, and output it. It's great for that. It doesn't have a lot of capabilities beyond that in terms of, like, say you needed to add a reverb to the sound.
Oh, okay.
It can, but it's pretty primitive. So at that point, you might want to consider purchasing like an upgraded software. And there's tons out there. And honestly, it does not matter what brand you're going with. They all do the same thing. So whether it's Pro Tools or Logic or PreSonus Studio One or Nuendo or things like that, they all do the same thing. It's just, one, how much do you want to spend, and what capabilities do you need? For most people that are just trying to capture their choir, do some basic editing, maybe add a little bit of reverb because they recorded in their classroom or something, they're all going to do that. So you don't have to look for anything specific there.
Do any of those programs stand out to you as being the most user-friendly?
You know, not necessarily.
Okay.
They all have their own learning curve.
Right.
And, you know, I've been a Pro Tools user for 20 some years, and so that's what I know. If I were to pull in Logic, I would have to think about it, and I would have to spend some time learning the software. So if you're starting from scratch, it doesn't really matter. You're going to have a little bit of learning time there.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So there's a certain aspect of which one you're used to anyway, but if you're not used to anything, you're going to...
Exactly.
Yeah, right, that makes sense.
And they all have sort of inexpensive versions that maybe have a track limit where, say, they're limited to 8 tracks or 16 tracks, but it's $49 for the software. But then you can buy their upgraded software that's going to have unlimited tracks and all these effects included, but that might run you $500 or $600. So once again, it just depends on your needs and your budget.
Gotcha. Okay, so now that we're inside one of these softwares, whether it be GarageBand or any of the other ones you mentioned, and we're dealing with kind of the basics of sound manipulation, I think most choir directors would know what adding reverb means, so we don't need to really talk about that. But let's talk about some of the other ones. So, like, if I add compression, what am I doing to the sound in that case?
So compression is basically squeezing the dynamic range. So if your, ensemble volume went from 2 up to 9, on a scale of 10, compression is going to squeeze down the upper end of your dynamic range so that you can bring the entire level of your choir up. So let's say you're listening back to your recording and your fortes sound really great and full, but then you get to some piano sections and it's like, oh, I can't quite hear what they're saying, or I can't quite make out the diction there. You can add a little bit of compression to that sound so that you can bring the overall level of your recording up and make it more listenable. With classical music, there is a fine line between adding a little bit of compression to make it listenable to a consumer versus totally destroying the dynamics of the song.
Yeah, right. So what would be some instances where, so I'm thinking of this in terms of like do's and don'ts with compression, with adding compression. Is that something where you would describe that as don't add it at all unless you have to? Is that how you would describe that to someone? It's in classical music type.
In classical music, that would be the purist approach. Where it's like, okay, we're going to take the loudest section of this song, and that is going to be the peak of our song, and we're not going to add any compression, We're going to let all the dynamics ride. Generally, to do that, you have to have a more professional recording to be able to pick up all the subtlety, because they're going to be using multiple microphones in their setup, so that during those soft parts they might be able to bring up some of the close mics and pick up some of that subtle diction, things like that. Whereas if you're just throwing up a microphone in your gymnasium, you're going to lose a lot of that you may want to hear on the back end. And so that's where you might want to say, okay, I'm going to compress this a little bit. And every compressor is going to have what's called gain reduction, and that is the amount that you are reducing the volume as it hits the compressor. So most of the time with choir, you don't want to go beyond, a few dBs of gain reduction, which is usually just enough to be able to bring up the overall level, but without destroying it. If you start hitting it any harder than that, where you're getting 5, 6, 10 dB of gain reduction, it's just not going to sound pleasant at all. So.
Okay, so what about so you've got the compression, you've got the reverb in most of these softwares. You also have controls usually that are some like high frequency, mid frequency, and low frequency. And I know in GarageBand they appear as dials, and you can dial them up or dial them down. What are you doing to the sound in a choir context maybe there?
Yeah, so that the way GarageBand sets that up is to make it familiar. So it's more like your car stereo. Most people's car stereo will have a low, mid, and a high adjustment. And it's exactly what you think it is. Each of those dials is set to a specific range of frequencies. So your lows might be 200 hertz and down. Your mids would then be 200 hertz to say 1,000 hertz. And then your highs would be 1,000 hertz and up. So the lows, that's going to give you sort of the fullness and the resonance of your choir. Obviously bring out the basses a little bit and the resonance in their voice. The mid-range is going to have an effect over sort of just the overall tone of the choir. And then the high range will be sort of the diction and the sibilance and the clarity of the choir.
Okay.
So depending on the space you're recording in, the distance that your microphones were away from your ensemble, you may need to tweak that a little bit in order to get a more desirable sound on the back end.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I didn't even think about the high frequencies as affecting diction, which makes sense because a lot of the consonants are very high frequency.
Yep.
But I'd always thought of it like, oh, okay, I'm going to turn down the sopranos or whatever. But I guess
it doesn't necessarily work like that because like your basses and tenors are also going to have those frequencies in their voice. Even though you don't think of it, but the voice is a very complex sound. So even the lowest of basses are going to have frequencies in their sound that go all the way up the range.
Yeah.
So yeah, like you said, you can't necessarily separate it in terms of parts.
Right.
It's more tonality.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. So there's another control I want to ask about in some of these. And by the way, I'm assuming because I'm a GarageBand person. That's where most of my editing happens for podcast and for if I do something at school with the choir, I'm going to bring it into GarageBand. But even if it's not shown on the screen in a dial, I'm assuming most of these softwares also have the same access to control. So compression, mid, high, low, all that kind of stuff is all there in all those probably. Right?
Every piece of software is going to come with their own suite of plugins. And so each plugin has a purpose. So you're going to have specific plugins for compression. You're going to have specific plugins for equalization, specific plugins for reverb, things like that. And then you just drop those onto the channels that you need and can make your adjustments from there. Okay.
And then one more of those controls there is, I've seen one in GarageBand that says squeeze.
Okay.
And it also says, there's another one that says bright. But that's all it says. It doesn't, I'm assuming it's like to the right is more bright and to the left is less bright, but it doesn't really say anything else. Do you have any idea what those are?
So that is going to be basically a different type of EQ that is dealing strictly with the high frequencies.
Okay.
So, and it does exactly what you just said, where it's going to take a certain frequency range, most likely 1,000 or 2,000 hertz and up, and enhance those or decrease them depending on which way you turn the knob. The squeeze is going to be a different type of compression.
Oh,
where
okay.
it's more of just I'm assuming it's also just a one knob thing.
Yep.
Where it takes all the thinking out of it, so that you can just say, I want more compression or I just want less compression. And you can turn the dial until you get the sound that you like.
Right, and that really hits at it mostly. If you're a beginner to this, you're going to just tweak dials until you get a sound that you like anyway.
Yeah. There is definitely a learning curve with all of this, and it just takes experimentation and listening to sort of start to recognize what each thing is doing to the sound.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And the next thing I'm going to get now, like I said, I want to keep this real informative and as brief as possible. So we'll hit the last couple of points here. The space you choose to record in, especially with a choir, is probably. I mean, again, this is a layperson's opinion. I'll get your opinion. I feel like maybe the most important decision that you make.
Exactly.
Because it will add work in your software later or take work away.
Yep.
Is that fair?
That is absolutely fair. The space is by far the biggest factor on your sound. Mm-hmm. It doesn't matter whether you're using a USB mic or a portable recorder or some nicer XLR mics. If you're recording in a gymnasium, it's going to sound like your gymnasium,
Right.
But that may be all you have, and so you have to figure out how to make that work.
Right.
So like Courtney, that's where she pretty much has to record. They have a stage in their gymnasium, and it has its sound, for good or bad. But you have to sort of figure out, okay, where can I place my ensemble in this room to get the best sound? Maybe if you're just doing a recording and not necessarily a performance, you have the freedom to set up however you want. So maybe she would normally set up on her stage for a concert, but if she's just recording, she doesn't have to do that. She could set up on one end of the gym, if she gets a better sound down there. So a gymnasium is going to be usually pretty reverberant because you have lots of parallel walls where the sound is just bouncing back and forth with nothing to stop it.
Right.
And so at that point, you may need to move your microphones closer to the ensemble so that you can get more clarity on the ensemble and less reverb. And then the other thing to think about is that you can always add more reverb on the back end. So let's say you're recording in a theater that is generally, most of the time, those are set up for, plays and musicals where the sound is going to be amplified through a speaker system, so they don't necessarily have to be reverberant rooms because the sound is going to be carried by electronics. But those are going to be drier spaces. So at that point, you might move your mics further away so that you get a better blend of the voices before they hit the microphone.
Right.
Because if you get too close to your ensemble, you start to hear individual voices sticking out, which is not necessarily what you want in a big ensemble. So you can pull those mics back, get the blend that you like, and then add reverb in your software.
Right. Okay. So obviously the kind of the resonance, the natural resonance of the room. If you have options, it's important to choose one that will take some of that work away from you when you're doing the editing later.
Yep.
What about things like maybe if you're not super sensitive to it on a normal basis, but like things about room noise? Are there things that you could warn people to look for that they wouldn't normally look for when thinking about even background noises that might come back to haunt you later?
Yep. HVAC systems are your enemy. So if you are able to get with your custodial staff and maybe arrange to have the heating and cooling system turned off while you're recording, that will make a huge difference. I mean, I have done so many recordings in the past, like especially like live performances in churches or something where you've got a big audience there and the temperature of the room raises, and then all of a sudden the air conditioner kicks on in the middle of the performance and just ruins it. Because you just hear this rumble. You know, there are ways to minimize it, but you can never get rid of it. And so if there's any way to have the HVAC system turned off while you're recording, if you're looking for a good quality, that is always best.
Yeah, and I would add too that like when that HVAC system kicks on, it's not just about the pain in the butt of the editing process. It's also the physics in the room at the time. It's creating white noise, which is knocking a lot of the sound waves of your choir out of the air.
Yep.
So it's not even that the editing software won't let you uncover that mastery that your choir just performed. It's that it's gone.
Yeah.
It's destroyed it, and the microphone can't pick it up anymore. The white noise canceled out a lot of those overtones that your choir is creating, and you get this. I guess you could probably describe it as just a muddy sound that comes out of the other end.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's in fact I remember one time when you came to my school to record my kids in our performing arts center. Like I'm in there all the time for live concerts, but it wasn't until we're in there trying to record that I truly noticed like all the noises that room actually makes.
Exactly. And sometimes you don't even know where they're coming from. There's weird creaks and just, you know, rafter sounds of the wind outside that creates these noises that you would not hear on a normal basis. But all of a sudden everybody is quiet and there's no audience, and then all of a sudden these things just start appearing. You know, sometimes it's like crickets and things like that. So.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think if just having if you're planning to record your choir, just having this kind of thought process going in, I know from experience can just save a ton of headache on the back end. That you've gone into the space that you're thinking about recording in before it's too late, and just sit there in total silence and listen.
Yeah.
Or even bring in a microphone into the room without the choir there and just plug in the microphone with headphones and listen to the room. Because you get a different perspective of the room than when you're in there doing your normal business. And yeah, that's a huge thing.
And the other thing to think about too is that, like, if you're in your school, there might be other activities happening in the school that the sound from those activities will carry down the hallway and into whatever room that you're in that you might not normally think about and is not normally a big deal. But as soon as everybody's quiet and those microphones are turned on, all of a sudden you can hear basketball practice happening from across the school.
Yep.
You know?
Yep. And then all of a sudden you're mad at the basketball coach, and
yeah.
you know, and it just really in reality it's just about you planning ahead.
Yep.
So those things are as little of an issue as possible. Okay, so last thing. So we've gotten through some of the basics of equipment. We've gotten through some of the basics of setup, the equipment, some of the basics of the software to edit. And let's say now we're to the point where we've got our finished product and we've got it edited, clipped in the right spot. We've got our best take from measure 22 is spliced together with the best take with measure 23 and on, and everything's ready to go. And then we're getting ready to export things. There are different file types that you can export things. You can do WAV files, MP3. I think there's something like ACC or AAC or something. What does that all mean, and why do you care, and why are there so many different kinds?
So a WAV file is going to be your highest fidelity file, and there's different sample rates. Your standard CD sample rate is going to be 44,100 kilohertz. If you're doing it with video, generally it's 48,000 kilohertz or 48,000 hertz, 48 kilohertz.
Okay.
So that generally, when I'm outputting files, I will always output a high quality WAV file, even if the person needs an MP3 because of where they're posting it. You know, if they're posting it online and they just need a low quality WAV file so that it doesn't take people 20 minutes to download the file, I will still always output that high quality WAV file just to have it. You know, so it'll be in the folder if I ever need it. And then the MP3 is obviously going to be a compressed file. they're file size wise, they're about 1/10 of the size of a WAV file. There are definitely some tonal losses that come with an MP3. Most people probably can't hear them. You know, somebody who is an audiophile and, you know, listens to, you know, vinyl records on their $20,000 home stereo system might notice a difference, but the general public isn't going to hear the difference. And especially if you're just, you know, getting very basic recordings, it's not going to make a whole lot of difference. But if you do want to burn a CD or something like that, and be able to sell CDs, whatever it might be, not that anybody does that anymore, but back in the day, then you will need that WAV file in order to put that on a CD or some sort of higher resolution format.
What about AAC?
AAC is basically a Mac version of a WAV file.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Honestly, I don't know anybody who uses that format anymore.
Oh, okay.
It used to be a thing, and it's still there, but like I can't remember the last time I bounced an AAC file.
Yeah, that's interesting. I just it's one of the options in GarageBand.
Yep.
So I asked about that. Okay, so you got MP3 versus WAV, and I know you just said that most people can't tell the difference, but does that also impact? How do I say this? Is that also impacted by the way a person listens to it? So if they're listening to it on a nice pair of headphones, are they more likely to hear the difference, or is it just is it just in the brain of the listener?
Yes and no.
Okay.
I mean, I think honestly, with it, if you're recording a choir in your school gym, the difference is not going to be as important as other factors in the recording process.
Okay.
If you're listening to a professional choir or professional orchestra that has been recorded by professionals, you may start to hear the difference between a WAV file and an MP3.
Interesting. So it really has more to do with what went into the file in the first place. What dynamic range, what resonance of the room, the details that went in have to be very high before you really care on the way out.
Exactly.
I see. Okay, that makes total sense. I had never really understood that myself, because I feel like I can tell when I'm listening to really good music, for example, but I know even for this podcast, I put everything out as an MP3.
Yeah.
Partly because I have to pay for the amount of storage on my hosting site, and
right.
I'm like, I'm going to run out of storage tomorrow if I do WAV files all the time.
And the way people consume music these days, whether it's through iTunes or Spotify or something, all of those are compressed formats similar to an MP3.
Mm-hmm.
And so people are used to hearing that. You know, it's not until you get into like, you know, either CDs or vinyl or, you know, high resolution files. You know, there's sites nowadays where you can download 24-bit 96K, you know, files of albums and stuff, and listen to them on your audiophile system at home. But there are so many factors in that sort of negate the difference between an MP3 and a WAV file. Right. That most people aren't going to notice,
including Contrai's last album that you engineered.
Yep.
That is for sale on some of those high fidelity websites where you can download the full. Is it 96? You said
Yep.
Yeah, and my understanding when that was explained to me when our album got put on those is like, so the people who care about that are the people who have the really expensive stereos. Mm-hmm. You know, if you've got the full surround sound built into your house, and you know,
or somebody's spending $1,000 on a pair of headphones so that they can listen to great classical music. You know.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so for a lot of what my listeners are going to, if they're trying to get something educational out of this, that's really not for you.
Yeah.
we don't really care about that, but that's still interesting to know. So thank you so much. This is very helpful. And I know I learned a bunch, so I'm sure people who listen will also learn.
Well, good.
Awesome.
I'm glad I could help.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thank you, as always, for sticking around to listen to the end of an episode. I always appreciate the long haulers, the ones who stick it out for all of the details. That is excellent. And of course, I'm assuming that means if you're still listening that you are someone who enjoys this show. So a recap from the beginning. This will be real quick. On the way out, like, share, subscribe, tell your friends, send smoke signals, whatever it is that you can do to help engage the conversation, keep it moving, and help me defeat Al Gore and his rhythms on Facebook and on Twitter and Instagram, anywhere else that you interact with the show. Just leave a comment, leave a rating. Anything that you can do to help helps me. So thanks a lot for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. See you next time.